On today's episode of Between the Levees, I'm joined by Mr. Mark Murphy. I knew him in a different capacity in a previous life at AEP River Operations. He spent many years in the wheelhouse. He's done a lot of ops work at Port Captain, etc. He is now the vessel ops manager for Mr. Murphy. Thank you very much for joining me.
Glad to be here, Tim. Good to see you again, brother.
You too, man. It's been a minute. How many years now? That was
sale
was 2016.
16, was it 16?
Yeah, early 16 was that sale.
Yep, 16. Yep, I was down there in 16. Yeah, I saw you there in 16. It's been at least that long. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, let's start off where it all began. Where were you born, sir?
Huntington, West Virginia. I guess that's where the log cabin story starts, right there in a little town on the banks of the Ohio River, Huntington, right? And then grew up on another river called the Gandot River, one of the many tributaries of the Ohio River. So,
were your parents or your father in the industry?
No, absolutely no. Yeah, oddly enough, no, he was not. He was a Baptist minister in the hills of West Virginia. You know, he was a preacher. You know, back in the day in the 60s, 70s. Yeah, he was, and it was a school bus driver. So transportation, but not the same.
Right. What did your mother do?
My mother was a stay-at-home mom. Yep, she stayed at home and took care of us 4 kids. We have 3 siblings and myself, and my brother. He's in the river industry. I think you remember him, Paul. Also, he was in that. So we're the only 2. We're the first generation, and then my son, he's a mate for Southern Towing Company. So
okay. Of course, I know Paul. I saw he is at Cooper now down here.
That's
what about your other siblings? What are they doing with themselves?
They're female. So I've got 2 sisters. One lives in in South Carolina, and then the other one lives in Proctorville, right across the river from Huntington, there in Ohio, Proctorville, Ohio.
And what are they doing professionally?
My sister is an office manager, and then my other sister was she's a stay-at-home mom with I think 4 kids. She's got 4, so she's busy. She's very busy. God bless her. I don't know how she does it.
What was life growing up in the you said log cabin back on the Ohio River or off the Ohio River?
Well, no, that was just a log cabin story. I didn't grow up in a log cabin, but it would have been nice. But no, I grew up right on the banks of the Gandot River, and I think that's where my love started with the river. It just started right there. I watched the river turn Willy Wonka chocolate brown and run out, and it started when I just was so curious where the river went. Where did that water go? It ran past that we lived in a parsonage next to the church my dad preached at, and there was a bridge right there across it, and I used to walk out on that bridge, and my mother would yell and scream at me, but I was always so intrigued with the river and where that water went. And as I grew up, I started saving my money for mowing grass and got a canoe. And finally I put in, and I would canoe down so far that I could paddle back when the water wasn't running. And eventually I followed that river. I followed the Gandot River all the way to the Ohio, and then I got out to the Ohio, and I'm like, okay, where does that one go? Well, then that got put on hold till later on, till after I got out of high school. And then eventually I followed that river all the way to Head of Passes. So so eventually I saw where it all went. But that's where it started. Just a real childlike curiosity of, where does that water go? It has to go somewhere. And someone told me one day, a science teacher, somebody, that water goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And I thought, there is no way. How does that happen? So anyway, that's how it happened. And I was so blessed to get to follow it all the way to the end, so pretty cool.
Were you drawn to anything in school growing up?
Was I what now?
Drawn to anything in school growing up?
History. I wasn't a what you call I'm a math person, not a math person. I'm a more visual person. I see things. I'm a visual learner. Audio. I listened and watched, and and spatial, not linear. And I think that's what drew me to the river, you know, and I think it's what draws a lot of people to the river is that, you know, you just, somebody shows you how to lay a 4.5 wire, and the next thing you know, you see it in your mind and you lay it. And it didn't take a lot of math, didn't take a lot of science. And, but as far as in school, no, I was a geography, loved maps and, all the stuff that lends itself right to just, you know, being a great fit to work on the river, you know, maps. And for my dad taking our little trips, and used to go to a little place that like AAA, and they would give you a triptych, which Tim, you might be too young to remember that, but they was called a triptych. And it was they laid the map out for you. And I always thought that was so cool. And one day I saw a chart book, and a High River chart book, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. So anyways, to answer your question, that math was not it. It was something else. Played football, high school football for Barboursville High School. And we went to the state championship my junior and senior years. I was one of the co-captains on that team. And yep, that was about it. Barboursville, West Virginia, home of the Pirates.
Backing up a little bit to a comment you made, for my sake and for the sake of the listeners that are outside of the industry, explain a 4.5 wire, and then maybe what you can, brief overview of all the different patterns, different layouts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when you just sparked something in my, you know, my mind there when you said, what did you do in school? And because we often talk about in the industry, and have ever since I've been out here, what attracts someone to the river? Why would someone want to come and do it? But I think that there's a group, there's a natural set that just gets drawn to it. In some ways, the river picks them too. And I think it picked me at some point because it fit in there. It was a second chance. And that's what I meant when I said, when someone would they showed you things, the deckhands, the mates, you know, the senior deckhand on the boat would show you things. It was a visual learning, on the job training, OJT, however you want to say it. But a 4.5 is there's fittings on the corners of each barge, because these barges don't just magnetically connect. They're connected by, you know, usually 1 inch or 3/4 inch steel cables we call wires on the river, and they go around these deck fittings. When I say fittings, they're like, if anybody that's watching the show that hasn't ever been on a barge, if you've ever been alongside of a dock, a ship berth, or somewhere on one of the bays, Mobile Bay, San Francisco Bay, Tampa Bay, there's big bollards or big fittings or round things that look like a mushroom, the best way to describe them. And the wires would go around these things on the corners, and you would tighten them down, and that's what holds all the barges together. And there's different names for them. So that was one of the things you got to learn when you first start on the river, is you got to learn the lingo. There's like a second language out there. It's like military light or Navy light, if you will. So you get out on the barges, and you have to learn bulkhead, and that's a wall. And, you know, you got to go to the head, that's the bathroom, and the galley. You know, you couldn't call it a kitchen or you'd be made fun of. They would call it the galley. And, you know, there was a seating arrangement at the table, and the captain sat here, and you dare not sit in the captain's seat. And it was an interesting time. It was an interesting time for myself as a young deckhand. In 1988 was when I started. January 1st, matter of fact, it was day one. So it was different. It was definitely different. It was a time in the 80s, the late 80s, but it was, the industry drew a lot of people that were introverted. And it still does to a certain extent, because there's a certain amount of isolation out there, a certain amount of quiet. You know, you have to be able to entertain yourself pretty well. A lot of Vietnam veterans were out there in the 70s and 80s after that time, which was interesting because they were drawn to it. You know, they had been over there, and they came to and it's still, even to the day, you know, a lot of people that are ex-military find that they fit in well, the regimen with the chain of command. And there's a lot of things that are comfortable there for people that were in the military. But I wasn't in the military, but that was the time. Those were the times. You know, it was a loosely put together. And even before me, in the early 80s and 70s and 60s, the river's come a long ways. It's changed a whole lot, from drug testing to regulatory to the way that we do business out there. So it's completely different, and it's like everything else. It just changes. Change is inevitable. You know, it's cyclical. It's going to go on. So.
Well, I won't tell you how old I was in January of 1988, but was that immediately after high
Well,
school for you?
85. I graduated in 85. So yeah. So I went to it was 88. It was 88 before I was a few years out of high school. Nothing else to do in that little town of Huntington. You know, you couldn't. But people, you know, people talk about how hard it was. You know, in the 90s or now it's hard to find a job. Oh my goodness, it was really hard in the 80s. It was tough, and the competition for good jobs it was tough. It was very hard. So I didn't have many choices. You know, I was going to go to college. My mom cried when I went to work on the river. She said, "You know, you're the only one that I thought that could make it through college, and you stopped. You're going to go get on a boat." But a little girl came along in my life, my daughter, and she, you know, "There Goes My Life." You know, the song by Kenny Chesney. I think he wrote that so that I could tear up every time I hear it and I see my daughter, because that's what brought me to the river. I needed that chance. And I think there's a common theme with that too. If you talk to a lot of people smart enough or intelligent enough or motivated enough to go to college, but needed to make money, needed to stay in this part of the world and not move away, and their industry drew me in that way. So anyways, college wasn't in the future. So.
Well, what happened between 85 and 88 aside from having a little girl?
Well, I did anything I could do in a little rural town of Barbersville, and that part, Ona and Martha, little towns that nobody knows unless you're from there. Landscaping and worked on farms and took care of cattle and just basic outside stuff. I've always been drawn to outside. Loved the landscaping and stuff. That's actually what I wanted to go to college for, was to be a landscape architect. I wanted to build golf courses. So somehow, like what they said, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, and so that's kind of what happened. I found something even better. And when I started on the river, it all took me back to the Gyandotte River, the little river that was in front of my house growing up. And it was so cool. It was, I was enamored by all of it, every bit of it. And gosh, it's great people along the way. Fantastic. Would do it the same. Would not. I would change some stuff, right? Just because if I knew now what I knew then, or if I knew then what I know now, I would have changed a lot of things. But some things I wouldn't change a bit, and the river would be one of them. I wouldn't, But it's great. It's been great. That's for sure. I would recommend it to anybody that wants some adventure in their life, for sure. It's been an adventure. It's been
Absolutely.
crazy cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been.
Well, while I was very much in diapers, tell me about your first time stepping foot on a tugboat.
Stepping foot on the tugboat. It was in South Point, Ohio, on the motor vessel R.H. Beamer. Stepped on that boat, and it was on January 1st, and it was cold, so cold. I mean, cold. A West Virginia, Catlettsburg, Kentucky, Huntington, tri-state area cold, rainy, snowy, spitting cold, 32 degrees and rain and wet, cold. And I remember the one thing that I remember the most is the radar. I was absolutely blown away by the radar. I thought that was the coolest thing. And they, the folks that I work for, Spirit Marine, the captain said, we just paid, I don't know, $10,000-$15,000 for that radar so that you can see it in the daytime. I was like, wow, but anyways, I remember that day. And actually the guy I was on there with, we've been lifetime friends ever since then. And we've worked together and worked around him. You may know him, Larry Evans. Larry Evans and I worked together for many years, and he was one of the captains at Convent and stuff. So you may have known him, but anyways, he was a great friend. He's been on the river the whole time that I've, years before I started. But anyways, that was my first day.
What was the onboarding and, I guess, training process for a deckhand in early '88?
Here's you a cheater pipe and a toothpick. Do what I tell you to do. You're a ratchet engineer. That's what they call you. You're a ratchet engineer. You tighten the wires, you do what I tell you to do, and that's it. Well, one of these days you'll be able to come out here on the head and I'll show you how I get these things landed. And we split up, there was no buddies. There was no real buddy system. That whole idea came later on, but the mate would go out on the head and he's the only one with the radio. He had a radio. I didn't have a radio. And sometimes neither one of us had a radio, and it was pure flashlight work. We did all hand signals, and it was amazing how much you could get done with hand signals. But it took a while. You couldn't just learn how a captain read hand signals in one day. It would take a few days to get to know someone. And anyways, yeah, I remember those days. Those were cold, wet days, hot days.
What was the run you were on, and what was the hitch you were working?
The hitch I was working, well, I first started in the harbor, in the fleet, and that's where I started there in Catlettsburg. And my journey on that boat existed of build tow on this side of the river, and when that tow's done, we go to the other side of the river and build tow. And when you're done with that one, well, then there'll be another one. That one's gone, and we'll build tow on this side of the river and back and forth. And so my quest to see where the Ohio River went was delayed for about the first year as I learned to build tow. But every now and then we would get to light boat about 5 miles down the river and take on fuel at Murdy Boggs and Son, right there by the mouth of the Big Sandy River. And that was like, I got to see down the straight stretch. So, and as time went on, that career, that job, fizzled out. Coal booms and waned so much in the 80s and 90s. Sin fuel, all kinds of things that just played into into how you kept a job or lost a job. It was all based on contracts. It was almost like a vagabond type thing, and I think it set a precedence in the industry itself for one of the things that people that rivermen get accused of, and I say this nicely, but they pop. They go from one company to the next. Some do, some don't. And a lot of that is no doubt probably people are chasing a dollar or benefits or whatever. But back in the day, you chase contracts with the companies. The company would get a contract and you would move over to that company. And hey, I hear this job, this is playing out over here. A lot of word of mouth. And that was all done by radio. There's no cell phones. Remember, this is a world with no cell phones, and the lines of communication, would you call them at home when you got home because the phones were at home, or you talked on a radio. The radio conversations were so intense. Every channel was full of somebody talking about something. So, yeah. So anyways, did that answer your question? I've just been rambling on here. What was the original question?
I think I asked about a fore and aft, but I mean, I'm game to listen to everything you have to say.
But you knew this. You're asking me to do this, the call that I would get, that I'm a rambler, but you're taking me back there. I haven't thought of those thoughts in a long time. And like I said, those are very pleasant thoughts for sure.
Well, people seem to like rambling. My longest episode was 2.5 hours long, and that one was the record holder for quite a while.
Okay. Well,
so no, I asked you about your entry into the industry. Anyway, aside from that,
anyways, it's all related.
How did your career advance next?
I was on the river about 2.5 years decking. So 88 to 91. So 88, 90, 88, 89, 90, somewhere that. I went to school to get my license in Memphis, Tennessee in 91. Went and got that license and came back and they put me to work on a big old 600 horsepower boat with no generators and all kinds of stuff. And I started spotting barges, and, and then just one thing led to the other. And I wanted to go see I wanted to get that mission of seeing where the river went. I wanted to chase the Ohio River to where it turned into the Mississippi. Little did I know it'd be years later before I could get there. But long story short, I had to move with the contracts, with the coal contracts, and I moved from a couple moves, made some great friends, and then it was captain. 91. I got to go drive a boat. I was a pretty young man, in my early 20s, and motivated. Man, I was motivated. I wanted to see what was next. And when they would say, "Hey, have you ever been to Louisville, son?" And I'm, "Nope, but I'll go." And away I go. Well, have you ever? Then I was posted to Louisville, right? But self-posted. There was nobody who rode with you. The captain got up and helped you down through the bridges in Cincinnati and all these places, and they would get up and they would talk. We would talk about them for miles before we got there, and you get people over on other channels when you'd be talking on the radio and say, "Hey man, I ask you, total stranger, how do you make the Cincinnati bridges? How do you do this?" And there was a lot of ways we posted ourselves back then in ways that we don't do now. In some ways it's better now, and in some ways we've forgotten just how high our level of communication was between each other, pilot to pilot, riverman to riverman. So yeah.
Was that your first time at the sticks, or had you been steering prior to that?
No, there was no steering. I would get up and go steer here and there. And I had a guy named Rick Chandler, fantastic man. And I owe him so much. Him and Larry Evans, both of those guys were just fantastic in how I learned the craft. And they taught me, back in the day, there was no steersman program. Today's steersman program, it's like a on-the-job training for the people that maybe that are watching this don't really know what that's like, but it's like an apprenticeship program. There was no apprenticeship programs back then. You would befriend a captain and say, "Look, I'm interested in going to get my pilot's license," and he would reward your hard work by passing along what they knew. And Rick was very good about that. Rick made many great pilots that come out of Catlettsburg Harbor, and he showed me. He showed me and showed a lot of people how to drive a boat. And then you would go over and you would ride with somebody else, and you would learn something from them, and then somebody else, and then the next thing you know, you would combine those disciplines and styles into your own natural style. So some days you can hear them talk in your head if you're driving a boat, or every now and then when I'm blessed enough, they'll let me go out on a boat. I'll go out, and drive it around and do some things. And I can hear that, hear those people tell me, remember this, because there was, you wrote in a chart book, you wrote everything down, you wrote all of it down. And then you also learned, again, visually, like we talked about the early part of this conversation. It was visual and it was auditory, where they told you, when you come down on this bend, you want to come early and stay late, meaning you would bring your barges up on the bend early and you'd stay late and then let it fall off when you came around the bend. So those were adages: come early, stay late. And then, and you would hear, "Don't run in the shadows," meaning that's where the shallow water was. Don't run the shadows, run where the moon is, and that's in the channel. Don't run in the shadows. And there's a whole bunch. I'm sure if you probably want to ask next time you have a captain on, say, "What sayings did you learn?" It'll be pretty interesting to hear, because they'll probably come up with a lot. Probably my favorite one was, "You may be pointed at California, but you're still in Texas." So in other words, you got a long way to go, but you got to be pointed in the right direction. So
Right.
anyway,
How many barges were you shoving at that
yeah,
point?
it was, it depend on where I was at, 15. I learned to push 15 on the Ohio River. And then I pretty much, I worked for the Ohio River Company, and that's where I got a lot of my posting. It was from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, because that's where the Ohio River Company, and then it was Oregon from there on down. And then when I went to work for Amherst Madison, that's when I really learned a lot of the other stretches of river, the Kanawha, the Mon, and some other places, but mainly the Ohio River. That was it. That's where I learned, and then and ended up in the Gulf actually later on. But anyway,
we'll get to that point. So was that with a 15 bar stow? Was that 3 wide, 5 long normally?
3 wide, 5 long. Yeah,
okay.
At a time.
Where did your career develop? Tell me about the trip that got you to the Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, when I worked for a high river company, they were nice enough to tell me. I thought that it was 20 or 30 and 30, right? 30 days on, 30 days off. And I got to that first hitch, and man, it was my 30, first 30 days off. So I called my relief. Relief was called up. I was young guy, married with small children, ready to get home, and ready to see my family. And when I got my relief, they said, "Well, your relief will be there, but you're going down and getting on the Peter Fancy, and you're going to take barges from Louisville to Cairo." And I said, "Well, I thought it was 30 and 30." So, well, it's 30 and 30, your regular job, but you have to ride for another 10 days to post up on other parts of the river. God rest his soul, Buddy Compton at Orgolf. And Buddy said, "That's how it works." Him and Ray Thornton was the port captain at a high river company. And he said, "That's what you got to do." So I got on the Peter Fancy, and I was riding heavy. I wasn't actually driving the boat, but I did get a ride along. And I got to go all the way in the Mississippi River. And we turned at Moore's Landing, actually down on the Mississippi. So that was pretty cool. That was very cool. And I felt like I had connected the Ohio River. Finally, that was the puzzle pieces were together. Now all I needed was from Moore's Landing to Memphis. If I could get that piece, then I could take Memphis to Natchez, and then Natchez to Baton Rouge, and then Baton Rouge to wherever, and it was so cool. It was exciting times, very exciting.
But tell me what you can about each stage from coming out the
Ohio
all the way down.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, because I put the Ohio together, and I was probably I was in my mid to late 20s by then, and then made some runs for down the I never really connected the other sections. I connected it with Amherst, and we did some drilling, and I took some crane equipment downstream, and just slowly but surely locked those pieces in. But about the time I'd be working that, I was at Amherst, they would say, "Well, now you need to go up on the Tennessee River." I'm like, "Wait a second, that's not the puzzle. That's not what I'm trying to get at. What about this?" They said, "Well, didn't you know that you could go to a place called Yellow Creek on the Tennessee River, make a right, and go south on the Tom Bigby, and you'll pop out in the Gulf of Mexico in Mobile?" And then again, my mind was blown. And I ended up going to Mobile before I ever made it to the head of passes. And we went down there and did some work down there in McDuffie Coal Terminal. And my mind was just mind boggling that I could have paddled my kayak or my canoe when I was a young boy, 10 years old, all the way down if I had enough strength or whatever. But you could do that all this water is connected and it all runs out. And to me, it was super cool. Maybe to other people, not so much, but it was a Tom Sawyer moment. It was all that. I lived all that life, and read those books as a boy. Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens was one of my heroes. And reading those stories, and I feel like I've had that kind of a life to a certain extent. I didn't have to build a raft and go down that way with all that stuff, but in some ways it's been that way. And then it was I mainly hung out. I never really made it down to Memphis. I made it almost to Memphis and turned back around. I thought I was never going to make it down the Mississippi until I went to until 2005. 2005, I went to work for AEP, and I hadn't been there long. And a little event happened down in New Orleans called Katrina. So, yeah. And that storm blew me in, you know. That's when it blew me in, and along with a lot of people, you know. I mean, that storm, when you hear those stories about, you know, how much it changed people's lives, that's incredibly an understatement. That's an understatement. There's so many things happened, and my life changed dramatically, completely. When AEP wanted a presence down in New Orleans, you know, and some really, really smart people put all that together down there. And that's how you and I met. And some great people, some people I guess I've understood it's been on the show that made a huge difference in my life. And I owe them much respect. You know, and they've changed many, many people's lives. They were given the opportunity by AEP to do that. And it changed a lot of things. And that was and my life changed completely because I moved my family and everything. We packed up like the Beverly Hillbillies, and down the road we went. And I was invited to go down there a lot. That's when my career changed. That's when my trajectory changed. My navigation plan changed. You know, and there's so many people that helped me along the ways. You know, all the captains taught me how to drive a boat, and I feel like I was a successful captain. At least I was told that. You know, I had some successes and failures like everyone else. But then the shoreside thing came along, and it all changed again. And I was a new guy. You know, I had to learn how to do that. Had a lot of boat in me, a lot of boat. And if it hadn't have been for people like Mark Canoy, Paul Tobin, Jeff Kendall, Matt Lagarde, a lot of those people that are you know, what you would call some of the greats in the industry, at least in my world, they were so good to my families, and so good to so many families, people that didn't have things, didn't have a house, and they took a lot of people in for Elmwood Shipyard, and it was incredible, the outreach, a lot of things that people don't even know how good they were to so many people, including me and my family, and gave me opportunities that I would not have gotten if I hadn't have, you know, believed in them and took off and took a chance and went down there and learned how to headline barges in Convent Fleet and do all that down there. It probably wouldn't have. I may have ended up here, but I don't think so. I think if it hadn't happened for Katrina, I don't think it would have happened. I think it would have went some other way. I mean, only the good Lord knows, but I know that I sure am thankful for a lot of the people. And I would say that most people, I've not watched any of your shows on here, but I would say a true riverman would thank the people. There's so many people that just helps you along. And I don't know if it's like that in other industries or what, but it seems like this one's very special that way. People are so helpful. You know, there's healthy competition between the companies, but for the most part, we really are in it all together. You know, so anyways, it changed.
Well, tell me about that first job down here. You were a fleet pilot?
Yeah, I was a fleet pilot. You know, they asked for volunteers. People would go down and live in an apartment. That was just everything was leveled, right? So I moved to a little town in Gonzales, and they had us all up in these apartments, and it was wild. It was I mean, you just can't take a bunch of hillbillies from, I can say that because I'm one of them, hillbillies from West Virginia, and take them down there and give them $40 a day cash per diem, put them in an apartment, and let them run a boat and go back home. And it was a great time. It was so cool. You know, we were learning a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot about our country and a lot about our industry, and it was different. It was very different. And you know, the people had left. They had just left. There was people down here, and you know, you're from that part of the world, and people just packed their stuff up and left the boats, left the barges. You know, we chased barges around and put everything back together there at Convent. And man, AEP came together, and it was a really cool, like, melting pot. You know, there was The Cajuns and the hillbillies. It was just it was really odd. I mean, if you talk to anybody from that was there to experience that, it was a real infusion. I don't know if Ingram and some of the other places had the same stuff. I'm not really sure. I guess I'd like to ask that my friends over there. I'll have to ask them. But there at Convent, it was a real infusion of people from different regions really came into there. And I'd never been to New Orleans. I'd never been to Louisiana. Read about it, heard about it, never, nothing. And came down there and just, it was infused. And we met these people. We come to find out that there's just a hair's difference between a Cajun and a hillbilly. There's just a real, if you think about it, is we have odd accents, right? We say some pretty odd stuff. We've got different names for things, and the Cajuns have different names for things that only. And if you hear somebody speak in that dialect, in that accent, you know exactly from where they're from. West Virginia has that. I think I've lost it because I've been on this wild circle, through my jobs. But if you speak with somebody from West Virginia, it's the same thing. And when we put those two together, that was such a cool thing. It was so cool. We killed possums and raccoons and ate stuff and gator and nutria rat and whatever. It was just the names were changed. That was it. But it was like brothers we had never met before. We were comparing stories and everybody, and not everybody, but most of the captains that were in South Louisiana vacationed in the mountains, and everybody in West Virginia and that part of the world vacationed on the Gulf Shore. So it proved it pretty early on that we all want what we can't have. We're attracted to what usually we don't have. And when we put those people together, such a cool thing came out of that. I don't know if you knew a guy named Joe Soche, but man, he was so cool. He was so cool. He took me under his wing, and him and his family, and you know what? And Denny Palmer, another one, Denny and Amber. They didn't have to be good to me. They didn't have to be good to us. They didn't, but they were. They chose to be that way, and it was really a cool thing to see how all that came together. And it's it's still down there. It's all that stuff's still down there. But that was a cool time to make it from West Virginia to South Louisiana. That was a great time. One of my favorite memories of my career, and it was probably one of the most challenging to learn how to do that. So, I guess you asked me, how did my career start there and go to Port Captain? Is that what you
ultimately? Back up a little bit. What brought you to AEP to begin with?
Growing up in Huntington, West Virginia, AEP was way more than a boat company. That was AEP was the power trucks. It was the Entergy or the Schwepco or Duke or whatever power company. Well, in that part of the world, it was AEP, and you could see the power plants. You could see the smokestacks, through the peak between the mountains, and you would see them. If you went to the river, there was power plants. AEP power plants was concentrated right there in the Point Pleasant, Huntington, Big Sandy River area, and coal trains everywhere. And AEP was the big employer, but you couldn't get a job there. There was no way. When I was decking in '88, I remember looking over at those AEP guys, and my mate would say, "You'll never go to work there. You got to kill somebody to get a job over there, because they work there until they die." And I thought, wow, that would be cool, And we would look at those other companies and hope that someday that you could go do that. And when I got the chance, a lady named Charlotte Roush, she rounded up some of us. I was actually there, and she gave us a call and said, "Look, I've heard great things about you. I'd like for you to come to work at AEP." And I jumped on it, even though I had to. I thought I was going to be working on the Ohio River on one of those 2800s, and ended up hopping on a plane and going to South Louisiana. So
that's how that worked. the trip down to Convent was your first job with AEP?
Pretty much, yeah. That was it. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
I thought about one on the Ohio.
how long were you running in Convent Fleet before you went shoreside?
I was there. I started in the late fall because it was only, see, Katrina happened in August, September, and that it was probably closer to December, January, February of 06. I went to work down there. And it was still a mess. Like you remember, I'm sure you remember that. It was a mess, and yeah, it was 06. And then I worked there shoreside. I worked on the fleets, and then the redelivery trade from Myrtle Grove. I actually got to go to Empire, so I got to see head of passes. I actually took the boat, now that AEP's gone, I could admit this. I boated out to the Southwest Pass because I wanted to see it. I had to see it. And we had a day or so, and I took the boat out there. I remember the guys saying, "Are we?" I said, "Yeah, we're going. I know we can make it." And we took off, and we went out there, and I saw the Gulf of Mexico, and so I knew where. Then I had to backtrack and get the pieces in, and then every now and then I volunteered to ride boats down from Memphis to the Gulf, the big boats. They were great about that, and I think every river company, if they can afford it, they should do that. They should let people see other things. I don't know if all river captains want to do that, but I know I'm getting off track here, but I think that there's a point to be made, Tim, is that captains don't always leave to go to other companies for more money. They leave because they're stuck in a rut or they're adventurous, especially the youthful ones. They want to see where the river goes. They want to live those stories. They want to do that. And if you can't, if at the very least, let them go see it. Put them on another boat. Let them ride for 4 or 5 days down wherever. And AEP was great about that. So I got to connect all the dots, and I finally connected that river. So
a very specific captain or pilot from Convent Fleet comes to mind when you say that. Actually, recently, I don't know if you've been following along, but little Timmy Wilgerson.
Oh, Timmy's fantastic. I remember Timmy's a deckhand for Joe Sochet, the one guy that said he was a true blue cage and still is. Left to go live his dream out crawfishing and catching bait fish, and he's done great for himself down there. And I still stay in touch with him. And Timmy was one of his deckhands. He's Timmy's father, and his father worked on the dry docks and stuff. But Timmy's doing well.
I've been following along on that on Facebook. But okay, so yeah. You end up going shoreside. What's the job, and when was that?
That was seems like the spring of 07, maybe 06. See, fall. It was the spring of 07, and they opened up the job for a port captain. There was only one port captain there at the time, and Wayne Lejeune. And they were interviewing for the second port captain, and they said they would be a total of potentially 3. They interviewed for the second port captain, and I applied for that job. I thought, well, this is, I've been driving a boat for 15, 16 years. It's time. So I applied for it, and didn't get it. A guy named Sean Dozak got it, which is a great guy. And we later on we grew to be great friends and coworkers. And I said, I didn't get it. Oh well. And but Matt Lagarde came and said, oh no, we're going to keep you here shoreside. We're going to keep you here. You're going to do special projects. And I thought, what special projects? Whatever. But anyways, and then that's when I met one of my very best friends and great guy, Terrence Gomez. Terrence Gomez took me under his wing and showed me dry docks and cleaning fleets and this and that, and just everything that was New Orleans. Terrence showed me business wise. Him and Sidney Gasson showed me all kinds of great things. And then Jeff Kendall came along, and Jeff took me under his wing. We got on a plane and flew to where did we fly to? We flew to, God, I want to say Nashville, and flew to Nashville, got off the boat. He showed me all these docks, introduced me to everybody he knew on the Tennessee River, and then took me out and showed me, and we drove down here to Paducah, and he introduced me to everybody he knew in Paducah. There's a lot of people. That man knows a lot of people. And then we went to Cape Girardeau, introduced me to everybody he knows, and then we showed up for the meetings that we had, safety meetings in St. Louis. And he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that, but he wanted to, and he just came to work there. And the third port captain's job came open eventually, and Jeff Kendall was working there, and I didn't apply for it. I didn't apply for it, and Jeff said, "We don't have to. We're going to post for this." He said, "But you know, you're gonna get it." You know, he said, "You don't understand." I said, "Well, I don't want it. I like doing this special projects thing." He said, no, you don't understand. You either do this or you go do something else somewhere else. So Jeff wanted me to be the port captain there, and I'm so glad I did, because he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot about business, and taught me a lot about the barge business, and introduced me to so many people, and took up for his people, especially when we would make mistakes. Just boats, people with a lot of boat left in them, and he was very good to me personally, and he showed a lot of help. He was a lot of help. So.
And how long? Excuse me. How long were you in that role?
I was in that role, so that was 07, so 7, 8, 9, 10. I worked there till 2010. And they moved me. AP promoted me and actually moved me over to Mobile, Alabama. And that's when I got to connect the dots from New Orleans, Mississippi Sound, over to Mobile Bay, and got to run that operation. I helped run that operation over there with Matt Griffiths, who was the sales guy over there. Great guy. Just he and I in a little trailer. And I worked over there from 11 to 2013, 14. So, yeah.
Well, before we get too far past that, how many boats, how many people, what were you responsible for up until you moved to Mobile?
It was about 188. I think, if I remember, almost 190. It was 12 boats. 12 boats I think we had, and I had one boat that ran up the Mississippi, the John Reynolds. It ran up from it was running Memphis down to New Orleans. They had it on that, and then it would stay down and it would run the New Orleans harbor, the Baton Rouge to New Orleans corridor. And then boats that ran on the Tenn-Tom just up to Calvert down to Mobile, and then some of the boats that ran over to Harlingen and delivered the rolled steel that came out of ThyssenKrupp there. So, yep. So that was a great play. That was a great opportunity. I really enjoyed myself. That was fantastic. The ocean, it was right there, and I couldn't believe it. I was working for AEP, and to see AEP barges with dolphins jumping beside something that said AEP on it, and it's growing up as a child. There was these little AEP stickers on all the telephone poles because AEP owned them all, and to see that logo, it was super cool. So, yeah.
Where'd your career take you after Mobile?
After Mobile, I went to work at I went to work at Siemens Church Institute, and again, wow, what an experience that was. I learned more about myself and learned a whole lot about I learned a lot about what I didn't know, more than what I did know. And so anyways, it was pretty cool. It was a really cool experience. So I got to learn a lot of things, and so much training. Got to meet a lot of people from the industry, and when you work at Siemens Church, you can see how other people do things, and it was really cool to see how other people had steersman programs and how they managed incidents and a lot of stuff. So I learned a lot there. It was well worth it.
And then what brought you back down to Convent when I met you?
Well, I left Siemens Church and went to back to work for Mark Kanoy and Paul Tobin and Jeff Kendall. I got to go back and work with them when they moved to ACBL, and went to work at ACBL from 14. Seems like it was about 2004. I was at Siemens Church for about a year and a half, and went to work for ACBL and got to run the steersman program, and was in operational development, and really got to advance my training skills and some of the stuff that I learned at Siemens Church. I went to at ACBL. So, and it was a great time. It was a fantastic time, and worked there, and then things changed there at ACBL at the headquarters, and so I moved. They transferred me back to Convent to run the training center down there.
And how long were you down there?
I was there till 2017, and then I think some things changed and business models changed at ACBL. So they gave me the option to have a severance package or go back out on the boats. At that time that the business was tough. I mean, the market took a hard hit right there in 16, 17. So I went back out and started driving a boat again, which was really cool because there's knowing the path and walking the path. And I hadn't driven a boat for almost 10, 11 years, here and there, but not really stand to watch. And that was great because I didn't know if I could do it again, and I could. And I ended up, I was really actually probably better at it. Then I took that break and learned all that stuff, then came back out there. And so, yeah, that's how it went down.
Was there a stop in between ACBL and?
Yeah, there was, and I worked here and there. I just, after that, I was just kind of like a gun for hire and just did first things. And, and I worked with some friends of mine at Marathon Petroleum, some guys that decked for me a long time ago that are port captains there. And I went over and worked for them for a while, but pretty much just bounced around a little bit, as a gun for hire, and did some professional witness stuff, and did some other things. I took a break from all of it, and drove a boat, enjoyed it, had a great time. Came back up here to, in Western Kentucky is where I live now, and I can move back up here to Paducah, and it's just been a big circle, right? Like for so many people, it was just a big circle, and I'm back, back home here on the Ohio River now on the banks. So, blessed by this life. This river life has just been, I don't think I could have picked it any better for myself. I'm not a wealthy man or anything like that, but man, I've got the best friends. I've made the best friends, people that if I called and said, "Hey man, can you get here?" They'd say, "Well, just let me get my shoes on," and they would be headed this way.
Right.
And that would have been Joe, somebody from South Louisiana or vice versa. You meet these lifelong friends and people that reported to me, and people that I worked for on both ends of the spectrum, and showed real compassion for hardworking people. And anyways, I'll not go off on that tangent again, but that's where it's at, Tim.
I know you haven't seen the show, so I'm going to take a bit of a right
Sure.
turn here, but as per usual, when did you meet your
My
wife?
family?
How are your kids? How old are they? What do they do? Etc.
Well, we've got 4 kids, my wife and I, and we've got a 34-year-old daughter that lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She's a nurse right there at Our Lady of the Lake in Baton Rouge. And then we have a son that's 30, and he's a mate for Southern Towing Company. And then we have a 16-year-old and a 11-year-old. 2 boys. So, and our youngest, we live here in a little town here outside of Nashville called Cadiz, Kentucky, and we call this home. It's it's where we pitch the big tent, right? Well, we got little tents all over the place, but that my wife, we met a long time ago. You know, it's been a long time, you know, and we've been together, and you know, I still date her. We date each other. We're still dating, but we're married. And she's been as she blows me a kiss off screen here, she's been the best thing that ever happened to me, this hillbilly. So but she's fantastic.
Next to that big river, I guess she does okay, huh?
She does okay. Yeah, she does okay. Yeah, she does.
What do you like to do in your off time?
Well, we've got 2 dogs that run around here on the little mini farm that we've got here in Western Kentucky, and we live out here. Got 1 neighbor, and we've got a whopping 4 acres here, and you know that's a lot of land. You know, because I lived in South Louisiana. If you had a 120 by 120, you was a land baron. You know what I mean? And I thought I had a lot of land, but my 1 neighbor, you know, he's got 4,000 acres, and you know, he politely reminded me that I'm not even allowed to call it a hobby farm. You know, he said you're going to have to grow something other than those native plants that you grow out back. So for fun, I like to hang out on here around this part of the world and drive tractors and stuff with my neighbor. And then also we've got a boat because we live right here in the lake region next to Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake, really big lakes. The ones that the Kentucky River runs through. The Tennessee River runs through, and the Cumberland runs here all the way to Nashville. So we live close to Nashville, about an hour from the airport, and about an hour from Paducah. So we live almost right in between both of them. So for fun, we get out on our boat. We have a big time. We pull the ski, we water ski and pull tubes and take our boat. We take it to South Louisiana. We go to see my daughter. We take it out on Lake Marpole and go to New Orleans, and we go to Orange Beach, and we take it to Destin, and we plan on a trip for Key West with our boat. We'll drag it down and go do that. But it's fun to live up in this region because there's a lot of, this is river central up here, believe it or not, this little town. 2 pool captains from Ingram lives here in the neighborhood. Another one for Heinz Furlong, and this one and that one, and wherever you end up going to a grocery store and you overhear a conversation, it'll have a lot to do with boats. You'll hear people talk about boats. And oddly enough, you come in, you walk into this, if you're from South Louisiana, you'll know what I'm talking about. You walk in there in Community Coffee, they know exactly what dark roast Community Coffee is. And they know what Conecuh sausage is. And they know what andouille sausage is. And they know they got all the supplies here to make gumbo on New Year's Eve. You know, these are the things you would know if you didn't travel to these places. And I didn't know you made gumbo on New Year's Eve and Christmas and all that stuff, but you can get that here. But you drive 50 miles in some other direction and it's gone, you know. So anyways.
That does cover the extent of my usual questions. Do you have any especially interesting stories that come to mind from your career that you haven't already shared?
No, I just, you know, like I said, I you know, if it was all over with tomorrow, you know, I've been blessed with a great life. Again, not a wealthy man, but I'm wealthy in so many ways. I'm rich with friends and great memories and adventure beyond anything you could have written. I could have written for myself. It's been a lot of fun. It was great to meet you. Good to see you again too, Tim, because I think we hung out and had some cool conversations, I think, you know, in the past. No, it just, I mean, people, it's a great living in a great industry, and it's something to be proud of. If anybody works on the river, they should be proud of what they do, and help somebody, help them, teach them what you know. Don't be judgmental though. Don't expect them, don't make it about yourself. You know, and that's my advice to these guys. Don't make it about you and your experience. That's not what it's about. It's about their experience and how they're learning, and show them something, but let them learn on their own and let them learn their own way, because we all have our own styles on the river, whether you're shoreside or whether you're whatever. But yeah, that's it. That's all I would say about that. Yeah.
That pretty much does it, Mark. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome, bud. Good to see you again, Tim.
You too. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.